Welcome back to Joe's Live Show. I'm Joe Briggs, and we're privileged here tonight to have in the studio Bob Bestani. Bob is a businessman and financial expert who's currently a visiting scholar at the Collaboratory for Research on Global Projects at Stanford University. Until May of 2008, Bob served as the Director General of a private sector finance at the Asian Development Bank, a multilateral bank dedicated to alleviating poverty in Asia. Prior to joining the ADB, Bob was a managing director and senior consultant at PricewaterhouseCoopers, LLP. For most of his career, he's been in banking and corporate finance, working at a variety of Fortune 100 companies. Bob also served at the U.S. Department of Treasury during the first Bush administration from 1989 to 92. His principal responsibilities included G7 negotiations at the Paris and Houston Presidential Summit meetings, several international trade and financial negotiations, a lot of really big stuff. Bob, thanks for coming in tonight.
My pleasure.
And
Good to be back.
let's not leave out the important little detail that you're running for Congress.
I am.
You're running to replace Carol Shea-Porter.
Absolutely.
You're running as a Republican against Mayor Frank Ginta.
Well, no, he's running against me because I got in first.
Okay. he's running against you. All right. So this is your second time back on the show. We're awful glad that you would take the time.
We had so much fun the first time.
So there's a lot to talk about, but how I want to lead into this is this piece by James Pendle,
Yeah.
and it's titled "Frank Ginta, if elected to Congress, education would be on the chopping block." He's kind of taking a hit on his performance in education while as mayor of the city of Manchester, and this article is bringing it down really on some less than stellar performance in there. Said, and just to quote, under Frank Ginta's watch, the Manchester schools got worse, not better. The city went from having a handful of schools in need of improvement to the entire district of 21 schools in need of repair. When Frank Ginta first ran for mayor in 2005, he campaigned on improving Manchester's schools. But in September of 2006, Manchester Central High School principal even had to put out a plea to parents for supplies after the budget cuts left them short on materials. And now a quote from Derek Ricker, the press secretary of the New Hampshire Democratic Party, who I would expect to make such a remark. Frank Ginta failed Manchester students as mayor. Now he's asking for a promotion to Congress to implement these same failed education policies on a national level. Is there a point to be made? Is there really something here? Do you stand different from Frank Ginta on education, and how would you, how could you, as Congress, make a difference in education?
Well, I'm reluctant to talk about Frank Ginta's record because I shouldn't be, and I think the people of Manchester know him far better than I do. But I can tell you this: that I don't think you'll find a more pro-education candidate than me in this whole mix. I owe my life and what successes I've had in life to my education. I came up through public schools. I had the benefit of going to a state university. I had also then went to the University of Chicago. Now, as you know, as you mentioned, I'm now a visiting scholar at Stanford University. And in the middle of all of that, I had an absolutely wonderful career, none of which could have happened without the wonderful education I have. And I've made sure that my kids got world-class educations. So I'm totally supportive of education. It just pains me to death when I see towns and counties and states neglecting education because we're really eating our seed corn, if you will. We're squandering the future if we do that.
Well, let's look at the fair question on education. That in the context of a federal office in Congress. Does the federal government have a role in education? I know, being on the school board, I find it a little frustrating, all the money, the amount of money that comes from the federal government with all the strings. Yeah. And so would you vote to have a higher federal education budget, a lower budget? How would you look at the Department of Education if you were in Congress? Well,
I really don't see much of a role for the federal government in education other than to be a cheerleader from it. Now, yes, the states and municipalities get money from the federal government from it, but it's essentially them taxing the citizenry and then recycling the money back again, which gives Washington a bigger role and a bigger say in education. but I don't see that they're really adding very much to the mix. I think this is properly the purview of the states and localities. Until somebody shows me something really tangible and a real benefit out of the Department of Education, I would say, I think it's kind of superfluous.
Well, the concerns that I have is that, in particular with stimulus money, is that it's for a finite period of time, just a couple of years, that requires you to hire people, many times specifically union people, certain qualifications and so forth. You hire these people, and then once that money is gone, you have a commitment to continue on.
Sure, those are not real jobs.
Those are not real jobs. Plus, you not only have a commitment to continue them, but you have a commitment to continue the programs that they were hired for. And we look at some of those. It's too easy to look at that federal dollar, at the federal dollars when it's budget crunch time, and say, well, that's dollars, that's money. Why don't we reach and grab that money, even though those are not programs that we would have used that money for if it's our own tax dollars.
Sure,
if we had
absolutely.
complete freedom
Absolutely.
of what to do with the money, we wouldn't have necessarily used them for those specific purposes. And yet, when the federal dollars expire, we're committed to continuing those programs.
Yeah, sure. It's in the first instance, you're being bribed with your own money.
Being bribed with your own money, exactly.
And second of all, you wouldn't have used those funds in that purpose in the first place. So why even go through the motion? Look, Joe, you're on a school board. I've served on school boards. I can tell you that it's the toughest thing in a community to do. There's no more thankless job than to serve on a school board.
Well,
but it's important work.
let me pause at that point, because I didn't read that in your bio, but to me that's one of the most important things that you've done, is that you were on a school board.
Absolutely.
You're just another person in the community who's stepping up and going to the late night meetings and
Well, that's right.
and doing
my
your
kids
bit.
were in public school, and I felt an obligation, as I have through my whole career. You're right. I'm running for Congress now, but I never wanted to be a politician. I didn't aspire to be a politician. I was having a wonderful career in the private sector. But I have always felt that it's important for citizens to participate in government at one level or another, and I've tried to do that throughout my life. I am running for Congress now largely because, A, the country is in crisis, and I think it's important that we all step up in whatever manner we can. And second of all, because my life's experience and my career happens to have given me a very strong background and set of experiences and skills that play and tie in immediately to the urgent priorities of the day. I think that there are three issues that will dominate the national agenda in the years ahead. I think, first of all, the economy, and that certainly includes health care. That's an economic issue. I think energy is going to come back as a major issue. We seem to have tucked it under the rug a little bit here, but it will come back in a major sort of way. And national security and foreign policy, particularly as it relates to Asia and the Middle East. And I've spent my whole life in all three of those subjects. In a broader sense, though, all three of those tie back to the economy. Because energy ties to the economy, foreign policy. We're talking about safeguarding oil, and we're talking about.
Well, I hope you're not in. I hope you're not in a hurry, because I want to drill down each one of those. And let me just start with this little fact here. Here in Manchester, we're just now in the process of passing our budget, and that is a process of determining what education needs, what all the departments needs, and determining what the taxpayer can bear as an increase. And the city is at the point of they're at a number here, and in that number this year will award our school system of 16,000 students $74,676,000 from local property taxes. So we're spending about $75 million of local property taxes on education. The challenge is that we're spending $18,500,000 on health care, health and dental care. That's fully 25%. 1 in 4 of our tax dollars that are dedicated to education are going to health insurance. It just, I don't, and it just increases every year. I don't see that as being sustainable.
It isn't.
1 in $4 going to health insurance. What can be done with that? Are you staying current with the healthcare debate? Have you been following Obama's latest plan? Where are you in that? What can be done one thing he certainly has got right is that the problem is the cost.
Oh,
And it's
absolutely.
hitting us taxpayers
Absolutely.
squarely here.
There is no question, Joe, but that we need to have a reform of our medical delivery system in the United States. It is a superb system in many, many ways. But the central problem is that there is far too much embedded cost in this, and it varies from state to state, you know. I mean, you can get the same procedure in Minnesota, and it's very different cost than what you get in Massachusetts or New Hampshire or Florida or wherever. And so there are a lot of hidden costs in there. Moreover, the price of healthcare is going up at an astonishing rate. And it is creating all kinds of havoc in the system. From the individual's point of view, it is putting healthcare out of the reach of the middle class, which is a tragedy. Second of all, it is hurting the United States economy as a whole. It is putting a huge damper on our competitiveness as an economy. You look at a car coming off the assembly line in any assembly line in the United States, and basically has $2,000 worth of embedded health care that, let's say, a Japanese car doesn't have.
Right. And again, we're speaking with congressional candidate Bob Bestani. Go ahead.
But it's also hurting our manufacturing and export to the rest of the world because healthcare costs are built into that. And those healthcare costs are basically making those products that we're trying to ship abroad uncompetitive. So it's hurting the economy as a whole. We must do something about it. The tragedy is, though, that the bill that is now being proposed in Congress does nothing to address the core problems of the rising cost of health care.
So what can be done? In your view, what can be done? Where is Obama's plan short? And just to bring everyone up to date, I've got the high points of his plan here. And they are cost $1 trillion over 10 years, requires everyone to buy insurance or pay a penalty, but adjust for the penalty for some workers, does not include a public option, adjusts for increases tax assistance to buy insurance, that's nuts, does not require companies to provide insurance, but penalizes those who do not, delays taxing Cadillac health plans at work, and raises the thresholds before those taxes kick in, raises Medicare taxes and imposes a 2.9% levy on income such as dividends and rents, fully closes the donut hole that can cause a gap in drug coverage under Medicare, but cuts payments for Medicare Advantage, ends the Cornhusker kickback that favored Nebraska, and establishes new federal oversight of insurance company rate increases. Let's start with that last one. Establish new federal oversight of insurance company rate increases. That comes in the wake of WellPoint, the parent company of Anthem Blue Cross, announcing that health insurance rates in California are going up 39%. And Exeter, they have announced, they're going up 27%. Is it reasonable for the federal government to regulate a private company like that, one that's fairly competitive, to say, no, there's a limit on how you can raise these?
You know, it's the tragedy of every generation that it has to learn the lessons all over again. I mean, I remember that Nixon tried this, Ford tried this, and it didn't work, and other administrations have tried it. It just doesn't work. You can't, as a government, go in there and say we're going to put caps on things, okay? It doesn't work. And numerous governments have tried this, and it just fails every time. Look, the tragedy of this whole bill is that it doesn't address the core issue. The core issue is the rising costs in the delivery of health care. That's what Obama was campaigning on when he was running for president. If you listen closely, he never talks about this now, and they have now shifted the subject to the insurance side of it.
Right.
Okay, and they're saying they're trying to get everybody under the umbrella of the insurance. They're trying to get roughly 30 million people under the umbrella. Look, insurance is an important part of this, but it is not the whole solution. If you take 30 million people and suddenly drop them into the system, you're going to have two problems. The first problem is that you're going to be incurring that 30% waste that we're all bearing. Okay, so all of a sudden you've got tremendous amount of waste in here, and second of all, it's going to spike up the prices for everybody else, the 80% of the population that are very happy with their health care. It's simple economic supply and demand. You've got a fixed level of supply, the number of doctors and hospitals, and suddenly you put 30 million people in there, it's going to drive the price up for everybody. This whole proposal that the Obama administration is suggesting is very similar, Joe, to rushing furniture into a burning building, right? Mm-hmm. I say, look, let's put the fire out first, let's fix up the building, and then let's move the furniture in.
Well, we have some breaking news, and Joe will attest to this, that I had written down as my one question for you, Bob, antitrust exemption. And while you were discussing this issue, I was going to ask you whether the antitrust exemption should be taken out. And lo and behold, I went to one of my favorite websites is Blue Hampshire for breaking news on everything the Republicans are doing wrong and everything the Democrats are doing exactly right. And a press release has just been issued by Carol Shea-Porter and Paul Holds that they are voting to strip the antitrust exemption from insurers. And this is Carol Shea-Porter's, since you're running against Carol Shea-Porter eventually, quote, "The days of the healthcare industry playing by their own rules are about to end," said Congresswoman Carol Shea-Porter. Quote, "With healthcare costs continuing to skyrocket and more Americans losing coverage each day, we must protect consumers from unethical practices like price gouging. Just last week, it was reported that the insurance companies are planning on raising individual premium rates by double-digit percentages, including here in New Hampshire. By increasing competition, this legislation will help lower costs, improve coverage, and increasing the benefits to consumers." Holds is quoted, "For too long, Washington's special interests have protected health insurers as they've built unbreakable monopolies, fixed prices outrageously high, and racked up unprecedented profits on the backs of the Granite State's insured," said Holds. "Health insurance reform is heading down the home stretch, and if today's vote is any indication, health care that increases affordability, protects small businesses, and creates jobs is right around the corner." I will tell you that I have been advocating for quite a while, probably about a year, this question of antitrust exemption. Maybe you have a better understanding of the antitrust exemption. We'll tell the only people that really have it are the baseball teams, right? Mm-hmm. Major League Baseball has an antitrust exemption. I think Major League Football probably does, NFL, and the health insurers, which allows these guys to not have to worry about states or a competition crossing state lines, or at least that's what the perception is. Yeah. So maybe you could first explain what the antitrust exemption does to benefit the insurance companies, number one, and then see whether or not you agree that it should be stripped out and whether you agree with this vote, because it sounds to me like this is a pretty breaking news type story.
Well, I'm reluctant to talk about a story that I haven't read and studied at all, but I can tell you this. I mean, one of the big problems is that the insurance companies have not been allowed to compete against state borders, and the Republican Party has been asking again and again and again in all the proposals that they have submitted to Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid to basically put that back in. The Democrats refuse to do that. There are a lot of things we can and should be doing, and I think this, from the sound of it, this is another attempt to basically get a government option in there, a single-payer option, where the government is basically providing insurance.
But doesn't that take away their their argument that a public option is necessary if they say that there is no competition between state lines and that's driving the cost of insurance up? By voting to strip away their antitrust exemption, wouldn't that give a favorable environment for insurance companies that you say can't now will be able to? They don't need a public option if they get this in there.
Well, but I haven't heard anything in there about allowing them to compete across state lines. It's saying that they've exempted them from certain certain requirements. But I didn't hear anything in there about allowing them to compete across state borders. Now, again, we're commenting on something that we haven't studied and haven't really looked at. We're just going off a partisan news release, and so I'm reluctant to sort of take it any further. But we've got that allowing the insurance companies to compete across state borders is, I think, very, very important, as is tort reform, as is getting the market basically into the system to allow and to push costs down. You know, the whole thing, again, from where we started the conversation, costs are rising too fast. Basically, what the government is saying is they want to impose the government on that curve to push it down. What we've been saying is the far better way is to use the power of the market sector and competition to bring it down, to pull it down. And I think that that's what's really needed.
Well, I'm glad you offered some suggestions there, because I was just about to mention that you've given us a number of things that we shouldn't be doing and pointed out a number of faults. And I was going to ask what we should be doing, and those are a few. But if you took a dentist and an insurance executive and stood them next to each other, which one of those is more responsible for elevating the cost of health care?
Oh, I think there's blame in the whole system everywhere. I mean, I don't want to, single out the doctors. I don't want to single out the insurance companies or the hospitals.
But doesn't this overprescribing of excessive tests and diagnostics and X-rays and so forth, doesn't that play a huge role in all of this?
It does. There's no question about it. The incentive system on doctors basically incents them to perform more tests. There's also part of tort reform that incents them to perform more tests as a defensive measure against lawsuits. So there are a lot of different things. You can't just identify one and say, okay, that's the silver bullet in this whole game.
So someone here on our chat line is asking the question. I think it's a very fair question of what is the problem with a public option, with a Medicare for all? What is the problem with that?
Great question. I'm glad it was asked. And this sort of gets to my core philosophy of government and the perspective that I would like to bring. I have always said that as a conservative in politics, that I believe government is important. And I'm happy to say this to people. And I say this because I think government is important because you cannot show me one instance of a country doing well, prospering, and advancing without a well-functioning government, right? Look at Haiti, for instance, okay? It's got near chaos in its government, and the society is a wreck. On the same island, on the other half of the island, you got the Dominican Republic, which has a reasonably well-functioning government, not great, but a reasonably well-functioning government, and they're doing spectacularly well. So you've got to have a well-functioning government in order to prosper. But having said that government is important, and having said that government is serious business, you've got to ask the question, what is government good at? What government is bad at? Government is singularly bad at providing goods and services. It's not designed to do that. Government is designed to basically take viewpoints in from a whole variety of different sectors and perspectives, churn them together, come out with a consensus and say, okay, this is what the body politic wants. It's not designed to be efficient. The private sector is far, far more efficient. Asking the public sector to provide goods and services is like asking a cow to run the Kentucky Derby. Yeah, it's got all the moving parts. It can amble along. It'll probably be pretty winded by the time it gets on the other side. But that's not what it was designed to do. And so providing goods and services is not something that the government should provide. So my question is, why do we continue to ask the government to provide goods and services when we see that it is wholly inefficient at it? Let's get government back to doing what only government can do, which is govern.
Boy, I'll tell you, Bob, this is very, very serious stuff I'm talking about. Bloomberg is actually writing the story, so it's not only a CSP press release, but it is House votes to revoke health insurance U.S. antitrust exemption. As the lawmakers voted 406 to 19. People have been clamoring and screaming and yelling about this for so long. Have the Democrats now learned what they need to do in order to get this bill through? They are now realizing that people are so upset about insurance going through the roof that they are now really working hard to get this thing solved, and we'll end up getting this solved, and then we'll end up turning it around and making this election coming up less one-sided than it is already?
I don't know. Again,
hang on, Eddie.
All I have is what I'm getting off of
But I mean, when you think about the fact that they have made this vote, which I have been saying, what the hell are they getting an antitrust exemption? Do you have any idea what the ramifications of that will be, or is that something you just weren't prepared for mentally? I mean, antitrust exemptions.
This is the first I've heard of it.
I know, but you know that they've had the antitrust exemption in place, which allows them to, Blue Anthem controls New Hampshire, Harvard program controls Massachusetts, and they have all their little territories drawn out. Will the insurance companies now say, okay, I can start going from state to state, or are they going to
sure
still,
hope so.
or is there going to be some sort of or is there some sort of backroom deal that they don't go into each other's territory?
I don't know.
Or is this just a vote that really means nothing?
We don't know.
Well,
yet.
let's take this phone call here from Eddie. Hey, Eddie,
It's
welcome
big
to
to
the
me.
program. You have a question for our congressional candidate, Bob Bestani.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. I just got a quick question. I wanted to ask Mr. Bestani, what is his position on pork barrel spending, even for the state of New Hampshire, and more specifically his congressional district? In other words, let's say he were to win. Is he going to try and bring the funding from Washington back to his congressional district? If I understand it correctly, the two Joes actually are in favor of pork barrel spending. They want our congressional district, our congressional representatives to bring the bacon back home, if I'm not mistaken. I wanted to ask you what you feel about that. Congressman Bestani, let's just say you win. Are you going to, or are you going to take the approach, look, that's what's wrong with the system? You had touched upon this earlier. What exactly is the function of government, specifically the federal government? Is it to lavish money on congressional districts? Because that's why we're in so much debt, and I think that's a huge problem. But go ahead with that, please.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. Politicians have learned that we can be bribed with our own money, and they've gotten very good at trying to do that. I think that there is certainly too much pork barrel spending that is going on. I mean, look, when they passed the TARP, the House of Representatives had to be bribed to the tune of $165 billion to get that bill passed. I mean, that's just egregious. I don't say that all spending from the federal government to the states is bad. And I'll give you an example. Look at New Hampshire. We have 77 bridges in the state of New Hampshire that have been redlined by the State Department of Transportation as in desperate need of repair. To my mind...
Let the state of New Hampshire take care of it. Look at Paul Hodes, whether he's hypocritical or not. Paul Hodes has now come out, and he's saying he doesn't want the money from the federal government.
Well,
whether that makes him a hypocritical skunk or not, I think we have to look at his position. Granted, I think that's, maybe he's a hypocrite, but Paul Hodes has come out and say he doesn't want the money from the federal government.
Well,
you're saying bring it home?
I'm saying that if money comes back into the state as an investment and actually ends up improving the society and the functioning of the economy,
every single program
that makes sense.
Is an investment. Every single one, no matter how insignificant. The bridges to nowhere in Alaska, that was supposedly an investment.
But that's
how we get billions and trillions of dollars in debt.
But that's by definition not an investment if it's going nowhere. But we've got existing bridges that are ready to fall down. Do you want to wait for our bridges to start collapsing before we suddenly wake up and say, hey, we got to spend on these? Concord doesn't have the money for it.
The debt is just going to continue to skyrocket. If we look at it that way, it's never, ever going to go down. It's going to continue to
that
skyrocket.
I agree with.
Well, we need the money for bridges. We need the money for this. We need the money for that.
No, absolutely, and your point's very, very well taken. We shouldn't be doing, the massive amounts of borrowing and spending that we're doing now to basically shuttle money around. We have to find money in the system for important things. So I agree. As long as we're borrowing money at the rate we're borrowing, we can't be doing it, and we've got to find revenues from other sources. Look, my whole attitude is that we need to be shrinking government in a major sort of way. A lady asked me the other day, she said, what do you think of Michelle Obama's war on obesity? And I said, well, look, I get the whole obesity thing. It is a serious problem. But really, is that what the Obamas were sent to Washington for? I don't think so. The only obesity I would like the Obamas to focus in on right now is the obesity of the federal government. If there's anything that is threatening the health of and prosperity and welfare of the United States, it's the obesity of government that continues to grow at an alarming rate over time.
So,
all right, well, good luck, and I like your background anyhow, so good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. So you're talking about the growth of government. So I'm assuming here that you opposed the TSA and making those federal employees. You oppose the massive expansion of the border security. You oppose the enlarging of the military.
No.
That's where all the growth has come.
Well, no, but okay. I think in very broad terms, the government has to get out of providing goods and services. Because governments are not good at providing goods and services. But there are certain things
we
that
provide
that you
roads and protection. Those are goods and services.
Well, again, I would like to see government going back to the core principles of governance, which is basically the rule of law, security, a level playing field, and a bit of regulation to make sure that we're driving on the proper side of the street. And you're right, infrastructure is part of that. But to the extent possible, I would like to see the government get out of the provision of goods and services, like this health insurance scheme that they are.
Does that mean also get out of the business of mandating that you have insurance? Do you oppose S-chip? Where do you fall on S-chip? The state child health care program for low-income kids.
Well, I think that the states can and should be picking it up. I don't see that that's a role for the federal government.
Really?
Why not? I mean, let's let the states do this in their own fashion. Let's have 50 different experiments about how to do it. Let's have competition about ideas, and let the federal government stay out of this.
Tom, welcome to the program. Do you have a question for our congressional candidate, Bob Bestani?
Yes, how are you?
Good.
Hello?
Yep, go ahead,
Yes,
Tom.
good show. Just a quick question. On this health insurance business, you're talking about two things. Tort reform, which I agree with. This across the state line insurance business, the question I have is, maybe somebody can answer this for me. If I, say, for instance, break a leg, I go to the hospital, the LA hospital, I have a Manchester doctor take care of it, I have my expenses, my anesthesia, pills and so forth, how is that cost going to go down if I go through ABC Insurance in Louisiana versus, say, Cigna or Anthem over here? The real costs are in the actual care. So how are we going to save all this money if we open it up across state lines to different insurance companies? Is it going to make that much of a difference? Because the real cost seems to be with the actual care.
Well,
so maybe I'll hang up and listen to your answer, and maybe you can clarify that.
Sure.
Thank
Now,
you.
all I'm saying, and I think all that a lot of people are saying, is right now you've got a carved up niche in each state where the one insurance company in particular is allowed almost a monopoly to provide insurance. And that system doesn't work very efficiently. What we need to do is allow all the companies to provide insurance across state lines. So you ought to have 10 or 15 different options for how to buy insurance, precisely the same way you have the option to buy anything in a grocery store. That competition will hold the cost down, as it always does. You're only good as your competition forces you to be. And that's all I'm saying is let a variety of players come in there. If you have one insurance company, then basically you've essentially got a monopoly situation where the terms can be dictated by the insurance company. And I know people, for instance, who want insurance here in the state of New Hampshire, but have been declined and they have no other option. But we do see another part of your question related to the whole notion of rates being different in different states, and that's again because you don't have a uniformity of competition. You have different companies playing by different rules in each of the different states.
Let's talk about your instead of talking about issues so much, unless somebody wants to call and change the subject, let's talk about your ground game. You said that you got involved and you actually announced for Congress before former Mayor Frank Ginta did. Correct?
Yes.
All right. So you already announced that you wanted to go after this position. What part of the state do you live in? Do you live in the East Coast?
I live in Rockingham County, right on the seashore.
On the seashore. What town are you from?
Newmarket.
Newmarket. So you have you been involved in the political We're very involved in Manchester. There's a big group of, as you know, there's a pretty strong group of red-blooded Republicans in Manchester. What's it like out there, and what groups have you belonged to? What have you been a chairman of anything? Have you been what have you been involved in as far as on the East Coast?
Sure. Well, Joe read some of them, but I've been involved in politics since I was a kid. I was always fascinated by politics. When I was in high school, I was in student government. When I was in college, I was head of student government in my junior year. I've been active in the Republican Party since I was 17. I have run for innumerable local positions like school boards and town councils in Newmarket. I'm on the Municipal Budget Committee. I'm formerly the chairman of the Audit Committee. I'm formerly the chairman of the Energy Committee. I'm on the Rockingham County Republican Committee. I'm on the Executive Council of the Rockingham County Committee, finance chairman of that. So, you know, the politics is nothing new to me.
So you're, as far as the East Coast goes, out in the Hampton area, you're well-known, well-established in that part of the state where Carol Shea-Porter.
I think so.
You know, everybody thought Jim Craig was a shoo-in because he was from Manchester, and he ended up finishing, I think, second or third behind Carol Shea-Porter in the primary. So we can't take you guys out there on the East Coast lightly, is basically what I'm saying. What have you gotten as far as fundraising, as far as allies, as far as endorsements, as far as campaign headquarters, or what are your plans as you go forward? I know that you came out in a poll that was done by UNH poll, which a lot of people don't like that poll, and a lot of people do. Of course, depending on what side of the fence you
Sure.
are. Nobody believed for a minute that that Lynch's favorables are 75%, but Andy Smith's been proven correct on a lot of his surveys. But right now, if you were head-to-head with Carol Shea-Porter, you were ahead of her.
The poll shows that I beat her by 4%.
Okay, so that's early in the game. I mean, there's still a long ways to go.
Absolutely.
Talk about what's going on in your campaign now, like what you're doing as far as offices, campaign guys. How's the ground game going? I know you started you were here 2 or 3 months ago, and you were just getting started. I know you released a list of 75 supporters. I don't know if that's grown since the last time.
It has grown.
That's been.
It's now grown. I think we have a public list of 150 people, but that's growing by the day. And I try not to make press releases every time somebody comes in, but we have a good number of volunteers. We've got any number of state representatives who've endorsed the campaign, and so very pleased with that. We've been raising money. In fact, I think you've probably seen all the articles. I've beaten expectations at every turn in terms of raising money. That's gotten me a lot of good press. In fact, the press has been very, very good to me. I don't think there's been a drop of negative ink that's been spilled on me in this whole campaign at this point.
Have you been meeting with editorial boards for the newspapers in the state?
I've been reaching out to them. They still haven't focused in on, but sure, I've gone to see Joe McQuaid, for instance, and Drew Klein and Joe DeStasso, and so I've met with them, and I'm continuing to reach out. There are a lot of different papers around the state, and I'm hoping to visit them all.
Is there any debates scheduled or being discussed between the campaign staffs?
Well, as you probably know, Joe, I've been pushing for debates from the very beginning. As soon as Frank Ginta announced that he was interested in doing this, I sent him a public letter saying, let's have, instead of going around using the same 500 words in front of the same 500 people, let's go around and talk about the issues. Because this is a point in time where we need substantive discussion of the issues, okay? We've got a crisis on our hands. We don't have time for platitudes. And unfortunately, I have never heard from Frank about any of this. But I know that there are some of the town committees and county committees that are getting ginned up to basically have these kind of debates and public discussions, and I'd love that.
Okay.
Hey, Ryan, welcome to the program. Do you have a question for congressional candidate Bob Bestani?
Yeah, I had one observation that I wanted to tell you guys about, and then I had one question for him as well.
Go ahead.
Please.
The observation I wanted to make is that a lot of the times, it seems to me, the political atmosphere today, a lot of the candidates that are opposed to the growth of government, and I'm not claiming to be supportive of it, but a lot of the times when they're opposed to the growth of government, they're supporting the growth of corporations. And I think, for me anyways, a lot of the times it's hard for me to tell at the higher levels of decision-making the difference between corporate control over the average person and government control over the average person. But besides that, Mr. Bestani has quite the track record in the career involved with banking and corporate, and all the good stuff like that has to do with financing, and I'm sure he has a pretty good understanding of economics. And I was wondering if you could take maybe a couple minutes and explain to the viewers, as simply as possible, I know it's not easy to do, but how it is that our country actually creates its money. And I was wondering if you could talk about the special drawing rights and, you know, all the things that come from the World Bank and other stuff like that. So if you could take a second to try and go over that, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Ryan.
Well, two very good questions. First of all, on the larger organizations, you know, most of the U.S. economy is driven by small and medium enterprises. And I think that's really the lifeblood of the U.S. economy. That's where all the jobs comes from. That's where all the innovation comes from. It's very rare to see large corporations actually producing a lot of innovation. Every new generation of technology, every new generation of business processes comes up through new companies. And just look at the record. And what's happening is, as the pace of innovation accelerates, what you're seeing is that the average life of large corporations is getting shorter and shorter. It used to be 40 years. It dropped to 14. It's now down to about 9 years. So it's really accelerating. It's the small and medium companies that are the lifeblood of this and every economy. And I got to tell you, having worked in large organizations for much of my life, I've developed a very healthy skepticism, I think, for large organizations. And so, you know, I think that we really need to focus on small and medium enterprises. With respect to money supply, you're right. I mean, there is a serious problem there because we have been abusing our ability, our privilege, of being the reserve currency of the world. We've been printing dollars at a far too fast a pace, and it's catching up with us slowly. If you look at the value of the dollar relative to any other currency, relative to a basket of currencies around the world over the course of the last 40 years, the dollar has been getting progressively weaker because we have been abusing it. We've been leaning up on that privilege far too much, and it is going to come back and haunt us if we don't stop doing it to the extent that we're doing it now.
Where is money created? It's a good question. A lot of people don't really know. How is money created? They just go and they say, okay, just start printing them up.
Well, it's a very technical question, but largely money is created right now by the federal government printing money. And we've gotten away from having gold as a medium to control our money. Now, if done properly, that system ought to work very, very well. What concerns me, what concerns a lot of people, is that the federal government has been printing money far too much, and we have been borrowing far too much from the rest of the world. It is a serious problem, and it really threatens the future viability of our economy and the privilege that we have as being the reserve currency of the world.
I got a lot of questions. I'm going to ask you some bullet questions to see if we can get some idea on bonuses. Health insurance company, California, raises the insurance rates on its consumers by 39%. The CEOs in charge of that company received 7 or 9% in bonuses. Do we have any authority as the government, or should we stay out of that issue of whether or not there's bonuses?
Well, I'm very reluctant to see the federal government start intervening in the private sector. I think that there's far too much of that. I think it's the shareholders who ought to be doing something about that. And unfortunately, the way corporate America is right now, most boards of directors don't have the power that we would think that they do.
But Bob, hang on. The private health insurance companies love government because government mandates health insurance. S-chip. It's a payday to private health insurance. You're using tax dollars to buy for-profit health insurance companies. So if we have no control over that, you know, it's just nuts. If we're mandated to have insurance, if it's even just as a matter of our economy impractical not to have it, if we have no choice, then it's a tax. If you don't have any choice, if your paycheck, if the government through taxes or health insurance because it's mandated has first right of refusal of your paycheck, then it's a tax. And if it's a tax, we have the right to ensure that it's done in the interest of the taxpayer. That's not the way that it is now. It's done in the interest of the corporation. We are socializing the cost for a private profit. It doesn't make any sense anymore.
Well-
We're well beyond that point of letting the shareholders do what's best.
Well, but you know, the reason why the government has that power over the insurance companies is because they have only partially deregulated the industry.
Yeah.
If there was a much greater deregulation of the industry that basically then allowed them to compete across state borders, then you wouldn't need that government intervention.
For those of you just tuning in right now, it's now at 9:02, 9:01 in the Wednesday. This is a live show, of course, February 24th. While most of the world is on vacation, the two Joes are back at it, trying to bring you guys people that you should be listening to. Your candidates running for office all over the place. And this is Bob Bestani, who has been working his tail off, well known on the East Coast, known to Republicans in the on the other side. Don't forget, it was shea-porter who came out of nowhere and beat the favorite, which was Jim Craig, the Manchester guy. Of course, Bob Bestani is running head-to-head with Frank Ginter, and of course, somebody just stepped in, Rich Asher. So he'll be happy to take any question you have and talk to you about politics and why you should vote for him. Of course, we have a caller right now, so stay tuned. And I've got a lot of questions I'm going to ask him right in a row that you may want to listen to. Go ahead.
Hey, Glenn, go ahead. Welcome to the program.
Yes, thank you. Nice to see you back, Joe.
Thank you.
Bob, you know who I am. My name's Glenn Millette. I have a question for you, and that is this here. You just made a statement, and I kind of agree with you that our federal government should be careful as they interject into private corporations. But here's the question. When the federal government has to bail out the very banks who collect our money value, why do we allow them? We bail them out, taxpayers' money. So why do we allow them to give $1 million bonuses? If we hold the pocket string, why can't we hold the rules and saying you cannot waste that money on bonuses? And I'll wait for your answer. Thank you.
Well, I think part of the problem is that we weren't properly regulating the banks. You've got about 7 or 8 different agencies in Washington that are responsible for oversight of different aspects of the financial markets, and they're all in competition with each other. So that the regulatory apparatus that was put in place was, frankly, a mess. There should have been provisions in there that forced the banks to properly capitalize themselves, and none of that was complied with. And then the prevailing philosophy in the banking world was that all of these new instruments, otherwise known as derivatives, and there's dozens of different forms of derivatives, but certainly credit default swaps, for instance, were never regulated at all. There was no capital requirement for any of them, and it just blew up. So, it shouldn't have blown up. The system should have worked if they were properly regulated and the banks were forced to put in capital against that. Then they should never have taken the huge hit that they did, and then we would not have had to have bailed them. It was basically a regulatory failure that caused a large part of the problem.
Hey, Steve, welcome to the program. Do you have a question for congressional candidate Bob Bestani?
Yes, I do.
Go for it.
I'd like to know how Bob... what would be the best way of getting manufacturing back into the United States? We import more than we export.
Absolutely.
Like, for instance, Manchester, New Hampshire, the biggest mills in the world at one time. We don't produce anything anymore.
Sure.
What could you do to bring some of this manufacturing jobs back to either Manchester or New Hampshire to get things, to get the ball rolling?
Oh, that's a great question.
Another healthcare question?
No, I love that question. Okay, you're right. We've got to put an emphasis on manufacturing once again. Look at what we do, though. If you look at the policies that come out of Washington, they're wholly sort of anti-manufacturing, anti-business. 77% of the Congress is our lawyers. And you see what their emphasis is. It is certainly not manufacturing. If you go to China, of the 8 most powerful guys in China, 7 of them are engineers. Where do you think their emphasis is? It's going to be on manufacturing. It's going to be on industry, and we haven't been doing it. We've also basically not attended to this healthcare problem. As we were saying earlier, we've got a hidden expense in all of our products that we have that basically makes them far more expensive than they should be relative to the competitors. So we need to be doing that. I think there are a lot of things that we can and should be doing, and we're just not. And those are two just examples, I think.
Well, just to finish up with this point, just because the average family health care policy across this country is $16,000.
Yeah.
When you have a starting point of a salary of that,
Yeah.
you add any other benefits, and taxes and so forth. It doesn't take long to get to 20.
Sure.
But will we ever become a manufacturing power again, an exporter, unless the cost of healthcare is dramatically lowered?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the cost of healthcare is now roughly twice as high as it should be. We've
At
got
least.
to squeeze that down. We've got to squeeze it down, and we'll find a big role in getting our manufacturing. But don't lose sight of the fact that the United States is still the largest exporter in the world. We're exporting a lot still. We need to be doing more.
What
So
are
when we talk
exporting?
about deficits are oil, energy.
Well, in large part,
yeah.
we're importing roughly $700 billion a year in fuel from the rest of the world, and we're borrowing largely from the likes
Yep.
of the Saudis and the
Just one
Chinese
second.
to pay for it.
Yeah.
So if we could get that down,
Yeah.
that would certainly dramatically help us. In terms of the amount that we have to borrow from the rest of the world, and add to our competitiveness.
Stop the bleeding. Caller, welcome to the program. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. I live on the corner of Spring and Canal, and I had a question with regard to the highway repair process. On Spring Street, we noticed a very large pothole on the side of the road right in front of a parking meter, and the reason why we noticed it is somebody fell into it, and it was rather deep. So we went to Town Hall and tried to report that. They told us that they couldn't do anything about it, and that we had to contact the Department of Highway, which we did, and they took our message and did nothing with it. And we were told also that we had to go to our alderman to have anything done. That was about 3 months ago, and that large pothole is still there.
Wow.
So I was just wondering if you could explain to me what the actual process and accountability is for things like that, so that things can get resolved on a more efficient basis.
Well, I'll tell you what you do. You call Pat Long. Pat Long is a proactive alderman. If you can't, and I know he'll answer the call. If you call him, you can go to Manchester Community Access. Just call City Hall. I don't have Pat's phone number off the top of my head, but if you just run his name in, Pat Long, Alderman, Manchester, New Hampshire, his number will come up. He will definitely get back to you, and I'm sure that when he makes that phone call and calls over to the Highway Department, it will get done. If you can't get Pat Long, can't get it done, and I'm just telling you that I think he will, call Teddy Gatsis right at the mayor's office and call him tomorrow, make that phone call, and again, between both of them, and without question, Teddy Gatsis has been able to move mountains in the city of Manchester pretty quick. He'll move a couple pieces of dirt and some asphalt over there. The only thing I may say that is asphalt right now, they don't get it because it's still winter, and when the winter is just about over and the warm months start to come, like right around March, they get the asphalt. So I don't know if they have asphalt on demand right now, but as soon as the highway department gets that first shipment of asphalt, the first thing they do is start going to fill those holes. So they should have gotten it done 3 months ago, and they didn't, and I don't know why, but it'll get done pretty quick. But thanks for the call, and I'm telling you, Pat Long, your alderman, will get it done. If not, you can call Gatsis if you can't get a hold of Pat Long tomorrow.
Can I interject here? First of all, I totally, wholeheartedly agree with you. I'm just really impressed with the job that Ted's doing.
Yeah.
I mean, right out of the box, we see a fresh burst of energy in the town. Reminds us what good governance is all about.
Well, Lou D'Alessandro wrote an op-ed, I think it was in Tuesday, saying that government needs to not play this partisanship anymore, and
Absolutely.
we need to be more bipartisan. Well, while he was talking about his own problems with Concord, where he's a state senator and the state reps and the party problems and everything going on up there, Manchester has actually proven that bipartisanship is very much alive and well because you haven't seen any of the infighting. I think it may have a lot to do with the fact that Ray Buckley is no longer the city chairman in Manchester. Brunel is not involved in the city races right now because the city races aren't a problem. And Chris Pappas has been neutered by his father not to say any ridiculously dumb things about Ted Gatzis. So a lot of the political rhetoric has dropped dramatically in the city. You take those party heads out of there and all the talking heads and all those people, you get them out of the room, let these guys do their jobs, and they can do their jobs pretty effectively without the blowhards blowing in their ears and pushing them one way or another. And I think Manchester, and Joe will attest to this, in the first 8 weeks has been so quiet. It's been beautiful to listen to. There's been no noise, and it's been great to see a lot of people working in the right direction.
Well, there's been a lot of people. I wouldn't say that it was quiet so much as focus. There's been a lot of work going on.
Yeah,
a lot of people. You know, a lot of elbows. A lot of people doing a lot of work. But
and I would give a large bit of credit to Ted Gatzis on
Would
this.
you have voted for Bernanke to keep his job?
Yeah, but I would have a problem. My problem really was with Tim Geithner.
Yeah.
I mean, look, as I think you guys know, Tim Geithner used to work for me. I think Tim's a nice guy. He's a very intelligent guy, but I don't think he was well suited to the position that he's currently sitting in.
He certainly doesn't seem to have the charisma or personality or the political savvy, all those ingredients that enable a person to be able to get their message across without it being like on a partisan basis. Rahm Emanuel is obviously not being heard from for a variety of reasons. Bernanke seems to be able to sit in front of a congressional committee and give an answer based on a lot of intelligence. He's got what it takes, it seems, to be able to at least talk to you in a pretty reasonable fashion. Whereas Geithner seems to always be on a defensive and to be always defending himself instead of his positions. I think it comes across poorly.
Well, and Tim is very good in a small group setting.
Right.
He's not good in front of a big audience. And to be Secretary of State, you need that presence in front of a large group. You need the gravitas. And Tim just doesn't
700 banks are on the danger list. I think something like 700 have failed over the last year or so. 20 have failed since January. What do we do about that if you're in Congress? Do you say we're going to have to put more funds into the banks? Are we looking at increasing the 100,000 to 250,000? Do we just let them fail and let the market take over?
You raise a great question. Can I just, before I answer that question, can I go back to the pothole question?
Sure.
Because no, seriously, because your caller brought up a very good point. And the point is, and this is something I've been writing and talking about for a very long time, and that is our infrastructure in the United States is falling apart. We have always been, sort of grown up with the notion that American infrastructure was the best in the world. Do you know that 2 years ago, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave America a grade of D for the quality of our infrastructure? They've estimated we need $2.6 trillion to restore our infrastructure. This whole stimulus package that Washington put in place was sold as an infrastructure package, and only 16% of $787 billion that they committed to that was dedicated to infrastructure, and most of it hasn't been spent.
That's right.
We've got to do something about it. I'll tell you how bad it's gotten. A friend of mine who's Indian, right, who's taking his daughter to school in Purdue, and basically called me up and said, Bob, I can tell you, your infrastructure is really terrible out here. Now, when an Indian is calling you to tell you your infrastructure is bad, okay, that's how bad we've gotten. So your caller had a very important point. We've got to do something, and this is not sort of pork barrel spending or bridges to nowhere. This is critical infrastructure that we need to focus and attend to, and we're not doing it.
Let me just ask you a quick rhetorical question, I guess. You look at famous Republicans, Eisenhower, Nixon, Goldwater, Reagan, the two Bushes. Which of those do you think you are closest to ideologically? Which one of those would you feel most comfortable with if you're part of their administration?
Oof. Well,
I like the Eisenhower there for a moment.
I like the president that I serve. I think George Herbert Walker Bush really, in the span of history, did a very good job. If you look, the decisions he made were actually very, very good decisions that have held up very, very nicely. I'm sort of partial to the
George
Eisenhower.
Bush Sr.
George Bush Sr.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree.
I'm partial to Eisenhower. You know, and I tell you why. Because I think these people, you know, basically saw the importance of government, said government was a really serious and important business, okay? But they weren't out there trying to push big government on us. And I think, you know, we push big government at the peril of the private sector and the health of the economy.
Okay. Let me just ask one last healthcare question,
Okay.
just because it's
We're hopping
so
all over
important.
here,
Yeah.
but that's good.
Many Republicans keep on bringing up, as you have done tonight, this this issue of cross-border healthcare provision. But yet, when you talk to doctors, they say that our cost of delivering healthcare is linear with the number of providers, because each of those providers has a different plan. That's why they cost different. They have different coding standards. They have different negotiations, different billing rates, different compensations. There's a world of complexities. So if you're going to open it up like that, in order to not explode the cost of providing health care, you have to do something called implement uniform coding standards. So that the way that a doctor's office interrogates an insurance plan is uniform. Simple website, same
Sure.
coding standards, and
Sure.
and all those things. You have to do that.
Well, but that's the function of the market.
But no one's talking about that. And insurance companies are going to, you know, freak out at that, because they make a tremendous amount of their money by rejecting claims.
Yeah.
When a doctor, you know, when you come in, the doctor files it, sends it to the insurance company, they say, oh, you forgot to dot the I, bounce it back for another 45 days. They do that time and time again. It just drives the doctors mad, explodes the cost of providing health insurance.
Joe.
By uniform coding, you eliminate that. How could that be implemented?
Well, I think there needs to be electronic record keeping and filing and all of that, and I think that would go a very long way. I don't doubt that the insurance companies would scream about it. I mean, who hates competition more tthan the private sector?
Sure.
Okay, I mean, nobody wants competition.
S-chip, all the health insurance companies, while you know, if we talk about, if the discussion is private option, health insurance companies are screaming communism. But if the discussion is S-chip, they're saying, hey, you got to protect those kids.
Well, look, my point only is that competition will sort all this out, as it always does, again and again and again. Just let the insurance companies compete with each other. You'll get better goods and better services at the end of the day.
But to me, it seems like if you're gonna stick to your guns about a free market system, then you have to go the extra mile, the Ron Paul mile, and you have to remove all legislation that dictates purchasing of health insurance. You have to eliminate the requirement to have it, because the health insurance company says, hey, you got to have this, and one way or another, I'm going to collude to control the price and put it up.
Well,
there.
but if you have a lot of competitors, and we have a lot of competitors in the market, then they can't collude. Every what's the word I'm looking for? Group of companies that try to control the market eventually fails.
So right now, Anthem Blue Cross WellPoint has 40 million policies.
Yeah.
Right now, that's huge.
Okay.
That's absolutely huge. You know, they're almost too big to fail right now. I mean, so what's to stop there from being just 2 or 3 health insurance companies?
I think they would be just far too big, and we've got to go back to implementing our antitrust policies, which we've seemed to have forgotten all about.
Well, the question is, if you take away the antitrust exemptions, do you then create a monolith? Do you create only 1 or 2 companies or 3 companies that can
and
trade
I'm not
across?
in favor of that. As I said earlier, I am very distrustful of large organizations.
Let me ask you, do you think health insurance is a privilege or a right? It's a privilege to drive on the highways of this country. It's not a right. It's a privilege to have a license, not a right, and that is, and anybody who's ever been to court realizes that it's a privilege. Are we approaching this mentally the wrong way? Should government not just be involved in this at all? I mean, do we try to implement You have the liberals on the left going crazy about the fact that this country needs a public option, that government should tame the beast. Why are we not taming the hospital beast? Why are we not saying to hospitals, hey, you guys, you got to lower your prices. Hey, you can't charge $3,000 for an x-ray. You can only charge $800 for an x-ray. If we're going to tame one side of it, do we then have to tackle the other side of it, or do we not tackle either side of it, or do we tackle both?
Well, I would love to see, prices of medical procedures and tests made publicly available. I mean, if I know that I need to go to Portsmouth Hospital or any of the hospitals anywhere in the state and get a procedure done, is there an efficient way of going around and saying, okay, what does an x-ray cost me at Portsmouth Hospital versus, here in Manchester or up in Laconia? There isn't. There is no such system.
Well, sure there is. There absolutely is.
Where?
And I'm flabbergasted that you would mention that, because Mayor Frank Ginta, on leaving here, it was his last great stand. Was he implemented a plan designed to save the city of Manchester 10% on healthcare costs, and that plan was to get the area hospitals and providers to post the cost of their major procedures, and that city workers would then have the opportunity, when they needed a colonoscopy or whatever, to compare those prices, and the city employees would inherently make the right decision.
Available?
Well, I haven't seen it yet, but he said he did.
Well, it should be.
Well, he asked them if they would do that. But is health insurance a privilege or a right? And I guess I'm thinking about this in a much broader scope. But if there were no health insurances around, the market would, the hospitals would correct their own selves. They would, if I had to pay for it and we all had to pay for our own operations and our own health care, the prices would be a hell of a lot cheaper than if there's a health insurance company out there, because if there's a pocket that I can go to get an MRI or something done, I have an insurance card. Obviously, I'm going to, number one, do it if I can. Number two, they're going to pay for it, so why not use it? If it wasn't an insurance company out there, these guys got to make money somehow, meaning the hospitals.
Sure.
Their prices would be lower. What do we need health? What if there wasn't a health insurance industry out there? Would the prices be a lot cheaper? Would there not be any medical care in this country? Or would the private sector start having small areas where people would go, like we had a doctor on here before, a sliding scale situation in Manchester?
Well, I mean, he points to the fact that when you go to the dentist, he takes your health insurance card, gives it to his billing person, and they somehow figure out what you need before they ever even look in your mouth. They know that you need 4 cavities, you need 1 bridge, 1 crown, and 3 cleanings.
Yeah.
They know that before they ever even open your mouth.
And then they decide, well, we can also get away with giving this guy a bridge and fixing those other fillings
but see,
that may be
that to
looking
me
like they
makes
have
the
wear.
case for Medicare for all, and the reason being is that it's a uniform way of paying, a uniform way of
Medicare?
Of paying.
Medicare?
Well, the Medicare for all, the original HR 676.
You're talking about having a government system where everybody's covered under it in a
Yes,
blanket sort of
and the
fashion.
reason I say that makes sense is because it levels the playing ground for enforcement. It allows people, prosecutors, whatever, to get out there and begin to examine for fraud, for billing fraud. And that's very important, because that's what we have. I mean, we read all the time about these doctors or these practice groups that get together and they buy an imaging machine and just start. Someone comes in with a wart, you need an MRI.
And that goes to the incentive system that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
No, look, I think the incentive system has to be changed. But I'm not in favor of one broad government policy because, again, the public sector is really bad at providing goods and services, and somebody's going to have to pay for it. And if you've got a system that is essentially, quote-unquote, free because, hey, I belong to it, so, I scratch my finger, I can go in and demand an examination, I think very quickly what you're going to find is that there isn't enough money in the country or the world to pay for it, and so what's going to happen is that we're going to have rationing put in place. So, I'm very skeptical. Again,
The
goes back
president
to
of
my
Canada-
skepticism of large organizations.
President of Canada came here to get his heart checked out.
Yeah.
Why?
Well,
Because we have the cutting edge
premier of
technology.
Quebec.
Yeah, of Quebec.
Well, we have the cutting edge technologies in the United States.
And he thought that it was a better place to come get his
We
heart
don't have
worked
all
on.
the cutting edge technologies in the United States. I mean, if you're in Saudi Arabia and you need a heart problem, you're going to go to either Cleveland Clinic or the London Heart Hospital. You're going to flip that coin.
I've asked-
But London Heart Hospital is part of.
But I would dare say that the healthcare in the United States is better than it is in England.
I wouldn't say that the doctors are better than they are in England. I wouldn't say
Well, I
that the
think we have better
technology is better.
research. Well, we have better research and development in the medical field than anywhere else in the world. The problem isn't that we don't have the cutting edge technologies. The problem is
I don't think the truth
delivery.
bears that out. I don't think-
Where is the technology better? I'm always seeing people come to the United States when they have serious cancer or serious tumor, or a heart condition or whatever. They come to the United States because we have the best technology. Where we're failing, though, is getting the costs down for the population as a whole.
I think that's a Republican breast thumper. I don't think that that's true. France, and particularly like in knee and joint replacements, is definitely leading the United States. We can't say that we are leading in anything anymore in healthcare except cost. Certainly our how long we live, we're not leading there. We're not leading in obesity. We're not leading in. We're not leading in procedures.
But what
we're
you're
not
talking
leading
about
in procedures.
What you're talking about is the broad delivery system. But on individual technologies, by and large, okay, I'm sure there are exceptions, but by and large, we have the best technology in the world. We're just not delivering it on as broad a basis as we
have
can.
the best technology in the world because it's made in the Netherlands, or it's made in Denmark. What do we make here that constitutes that great technology?
You don't
It's
think
made
Johnson
by Philips, which is not
wait a
here.
minute. Johnson & Johnson makes some extraordinary
General Electric.
Stent. If you
General
need a
Electric.
stent, yeah.
General Electric
No,
is on the key.
but that's it's normal, and it's frankly healthy that the rest of the world is competing with us on all kinds of things.
What would be the first bill you would write if you won and you were sworn in on January 4th of next year? Would you have a bill ready to go? Would there a couple of bills you'd like to change?
Well, it goes back to the question that you asked before that I didn't answer, which was about banking. I would like to see the banking regulatory structure much streamlined down, put together, stop this nonsense of having 7 or 8 different agencies competing with each other, having the banks basically go shop around for which regulator they want, and causing a fair amount of confusion. I think we need to do that. And if we can get some rationality into the financial system, then I think that we're way ahead of the game, because then we can get the banks out there providing finance to companies, particularly small and medium companies. We can get some rationality to what they're doing. Right now, it's all over the place, and it's causing mayhem in the society.
Who would you like to see run for president against Barack Obama in 2.5 years? Is there anybody that you think stands out as a... Do you like the Gingrich idea? Do you like the Ron Paul idea? Do you think Sarah Palin or Mitt Romney? Do you think there's somebody out there Tim Pawlenty, who's been coming to the state on occasion, who's coming soon? We're having a lot of these people come in. Is there a certain person you think that's out there that has a shot at this early stage?
It's far too early to tell. It really is. I mean, there are candidates that I like, and I'm reluctant to sort of put my imprimatur on them. If they want to put their imprimatur on me, that might be fine.
In 2006, I think I bet $50 that the candidate who, won the Democratic convention would have been Bill Richardson, just on the strength of his resume. And boy, did he fizzle out.
But this is what's so interesting about presidential politics. It's always a surprise. The guy who wins is always a surprise. I mean, think back in history. Nobody thought Kennedy was going to do it.
Carter,
and nobody ever thought that Lyndon Johnson would be president of the United States. Okay, but by accident he was. Nobody thought that Nixon had a life after that, after he bailed out. Nobody thought that Gerald Ford would be president. Nobody ever heard of Jimmy Carter. Everybody said Ronald Reagan was too old, and on and on and on. And the most recent case is Barack Obama, who 2 years ago gave Barack Obama a fighting chance to be president. It's always a surprise.
Is there anything about Barack Obama's policies that you think he's right on? Is there anything, do you think he's doing a good job in Afghanistan? Did you think the surge was the right move? Do you think that the request for 40 should have been answered and not 30? What do you have to say about his first year, literally a year and a month in office?
I will say to you, I admire his deliberativeness. He's willing to think through a problem. And I may not always like what he comes up with at the end, but he's giving it due consideration and thinking about it, which I think is very, very healthy. And I think we saw this with Afghanistan. I think going into that decision, he wanted just to get the hell out of there. And I think a lot of us would like to see us get the hell out of there. But in the final analysis, I don't think you can. I wrote an article basically saying the decision to beef up our forces in Afghanistan was the least worst option. And I very reluctantly agreed with it, mostly because I think the fight is not so much about Afghanistan, but it's really about Pakistan. Because Pakistan is everybody's foreign policy nightmare, and it could still fall apart. And it's probably good that we're right there next door.
Yeah, but that's such a twisted story, Pakistan, because before 9/11, Pakistan was actually, I think, maybe bordering on a success story, because even though there was Musharraf, it was a stably run country. They had a pretty decent education system. They had a lot going for it, and even though many people, on this side of the pond will criticize the autonomy of their military, it was a pretty noble institution, and it was well run, and there wasn't really a problem. And so what has happened after 9/11 is you get all these dynamics there. And I think that's largely why we are in Afghanistan right now, because the Indians have always been fearful. That's their enemy. And they want to destabilize their enemy. You've had Israelis with an interest in there. There's a lot of and of course Iran. You got a lot of dynamics there, and nothing is ever what we're told that it is. And I'd have to think that Pakistan today is much worse off than it was on September 10th, 2001.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I think the Musharraf government, as unpopular as it had been towards the end, basically represented a period of stability. But I think, Joe, you're looking at it too narrowly, in the sense that if you broaden the horizon out and look at the history of Pakistan over the course of the last 50 years. In fact, if you go back to the inception of Pakistan from the very beginning, it has been a highly troubled state from the very beginning. And yes, there have been periods of stability, like the Musharraf government, particularly in the first couple of years, but then it rapidly destabilized, and you know all of the troubles in Pakistan that occurred, and now is just getting progressively worse. So yeah, it plateaued off.
But I'm not. I think that one of the reasons it's getting worse is because of us.
I'm sorry?
I think one of the reasons it's getting worse is because of us.
In what way?
Certainly our heavy-handedness. The very moment that Colin Powell says it's our way or the highway. I mean, we really exerted some heavy, heavy force in Pakistan to coerce them to do our heavy work over there. And it's we spent a lot of money. What, $2.5 billion a year since then? And to Musharraf's great credit, I mean, he could tell you where that was spent down to the cement factory. I mean, I think he did a pretty good job administering that money. But our influence has let me put it this way: Pakistan has destabilized under our influence and our money and under this process.
I'd have to differ with you. I'm sure that we've made mistakes in Pakistan, but honest to God, they've done a really good job of destabilizing themselves. I mean, they've got so many different ethnic groups there. I mean, look at Karachi. You've got 4 or 5 different ethnic groups that are all at war with each other. You've got the government. I mean, look at this government. I mean, this government is basically on the edge of collapse. You've got massive corruption in the country.
One could say it just exactly the other way, because you had the rule of law here just this week, whereas the Supreme Court justice, who the president was trying to move out of his seat
Sure.
was retained by the rule of law.
Yeah.
And Pakistan has twice seen a bunch of suit and tie lawyers riot in the street protesting for the rule of law.
Sure.
And what Musharraf was doing to destabilize the Supreme Court.
Sure, sure.
So I think those were all, very good stories. But for the life of me, I can't understand what our benefit is in Afghanistan.
Well, okay. I mean,
Yeah.
there are a number of things you've made. Look, I'm not saying everything in Pakistan is wrong. I'm saying that that on the whole, it's a very unstable place and everybody's nightmare with nuclear weapons. I think in Afghanistan, I think if we were just to suddenly precipitously withdraw from Afghanistan, it would have given a major political and psychological boost to the Taliban and to Al-Qaeda. That they've beaten us exactly the way they said that they had beaten the Russians, and in point of fact, they had in Afghanistan. Right. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Eric, welcome to the program. You have a question for congressional candidate Bob Bestani, who you can see more of at bobbestani.com.
Thanks for the plug.
I got an oddball question for anybody that likes to answer it there tonight. They keep saying it from different people that the President Barack Obama doesn't have his own. He isn't a citizen of the United States, and they keep harping on it. And they're saying now, when people run again in 2012, that they're going to make sure that the person has a right, that has their birth certificate and all that. So why won't they let that go? He's the president, and they just won't let it go. So I'll hang up if somebody wants to answer that question.
Good point.
Let
it go.
It's a good. Really, I mean, it's he's the president of the United States now. There's always a faction out there that likes to just go after this guy. There's a faction. You go back to Bush's when he was a president. My goodness, they didn't leave him alone either. So, it's really a non-issue, isn't it? Or do you think he's not really the president of the United States?
I mean, he's sworn in as president of the United States. The Supreme, Court would probably find in that, right? I mean, but this goes on all the time. I mean, I remember Lyndon Johnson. There were lots of discussions about did Lyndon Johnson knock off Kennedy? And there were people who sincerely believed that. And
I think he did.
Nixon was impeached.
Well, it's since you mentioned Kennedy, and we're talking foreign policy, let's go back to Robert Kennedy, because Robert Kennedy was assassinated by the son of Palestinian Christians who were kicked off of their land by the Zionist government there, kicked off of their land, and they ended up moving to New York, raising Sirhan in New York, who went to school, I think, in public school in Brooklyn. And as he grew up and became more aware of his heritage, it just made him more and more upset. And Robert Kennedy had promised to send Israel 50 jets if elected. And that was more than he could bear, and he shot him with a .22 rifle. It goes way back. That's the first solid indication of blowback from our policies, I guess. And today we hear Benjamin Netanyahu is now saying, well, over in the West Bank, hey, well, this is a religious site, and this is a religious site, and this is a religious site, so we still need all the West Bank. Every time there's a West Bank settlement, soon thereafter, there's one or two spats of terrorism and suicide bombers. When is this going to end? Wouldn't you agree that at least that's one area that Obama had exactly correct?
Well, and we talked about this the last time I was here. What troubles me about that whole situation is that we were on the brink of seeing daylight there, which was basically the two-state solution.
And when was this?
Well, during the Oslo process. Okay, we were moving up to two-state solution. And
that's back when Dennis Ross was acting as Israel's lawyer.
Well, that's right. And then when you had Rabin in place, and basically, if you had a two-state solution where the Palestinians had a homeland and the Israelis basically had theirs, it would work. But I think we've gotten to a point where the two-state solution is now gone. And this is very troublesome, because a three-state solution isn't going to work, okay, where you have the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, okay, and because the West Bank is disappearing very rapidly, the Israeli government itself cannot take the settlers out of the West Bank. It would rip the nation apart, would rip the military apart. I mean, Sharon tried to take 12 settlers out. Sharon being the big, settlement guy, he tried to move a dozen, and it just about ripped up the military. So here's the question: what worries me for the next 20 years? The Muslims are growing, they're procreating at a much faster rate than Israel, than the Jewish population is, okay? And so what happens in 20 years when, let's say, the Palestinians outnumber the Israelis in Israel, okay?
Well, what do they do? 48 and kick them out.
What do they do? Do they, open the border with Jordan and push everybody out? It's called ethnic cleansing.
They find the descendant of King Herod, exactly.
Or do they run an apartheid state?
That's what they're doing now.
Or do they say, okay, we're no longer a Jewish state because it's one man, one vote? That's the problem, and it's coming. It's coming down the pike.
Maybe that's why Barack Obama has decided that it's time for this country to build nuclear power plants. Maybe he realized, after trying to make a good faith effort behind the scenes, that there will not be a solution unless they fight it out themselves, and we need to get out of there and let them take the gloves off on their own. Do you think it's fair?
I don't think we ever will.
Actually, do you think it's fair that Congress has the president of, I don't know the name, Mr. Toyota. It just happens that his name is Toyota. Grandson of the founder of Toyota is actually had to come to this country and sit in front of a congressional panel to talk about their problem with their brakes. How many recalls have GM and Ford and Chrysler had to do in the last 25 years? And how many times have you seen a congressional panel take these guys and vilify them in public and treat them like they're criminals and actually have them come in front of them and have the FBI raiding their offices, have the FBI and the government sending out subpoenas for one of our biggest, best allies in the East, over in the Asian basin to come in front of us this way? Do you think this is politics that's being played in Washington, D.C., or do you think that it's fair game?
Well, the observation has been made that the government owns big, a big car company.
Isn't that interesting? Correct.
And it's there is an element of piling on here.
Well, say what you just said, because I don't think people realize, but the United States government owns a big share of GM. So, and now you have...
And we sold Chrysler, by the way. Remember, we paid billions for Chrysler and then sold it for $1.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we could say we own two big Detroit auto companies.
Now, do you think, this is another free market system. If Toyota's brakes are found to have a problem, you take that company to federal court and you sue the pants off of them.
Yeah.
Is there something that the Congress is going to be able to say, well, we're going to enact a law that your brakes can't do such and such a thing? I mean, does this fly in the face of our fair market system and also fly in the face of just nasty politics being played by our government?
Well, certainly we've got lots of nasty politics, and frankly, this is something that really worries
How
me.
many people? If Japan sent the president of GM or the president from New Hampshire, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, a subpoena and said, "You're going to come in front of our country. You're going to sit in front of our body of government and answer questions." We would poo and pah and laugh, and our country would just go crazy and say that is inappropriate.
But we did it.
Yet we do it to these guys.
Yeah, but we did it. I remember there was an instance where the chairman of Citibank had to go to Tokyo to apologize, Mr. Prince, and I remember him taking a very deep bow. It was on the front pages of most of the newspapers.
But that was an act of corruption. This is not. Are they saying that this is some sort of an act of corruption on the part of the Japanese or Toyota?
Well,
is it also factual or based on the fact that most of the parts are built here in this country, and our own people may have been the ones that have been building these flaws?
Well, part of the problem, though, was a question of governance, because they still don't know what has created. I mean, first it was the mats, then it was the accelerator. Now they're talking about the electronics, and Toyota really hasn't been upfront and very clear about, hey, we have a problem here. Let's all get on top of this. And
well, I think there's a little bit of them all. I mean, all almost every car on the road today, when they put on those extra large designer floor mats, they conflict with the accelerator.
But
Toyota's not the only one that's had
right.
that
No,
problem.
So the
I
question-
agree with you, but even now they're saying it's not the accelerator, it's not the.
I don't
the
really want to
floor
get
mats,
into
the
whether, I don't want to
electronics.
get involved in the engineering of the car. I want to get involved in the issue of, so do you think it's fair that we, as the United States government and the Congress, have the right to issue subpoenas and bring another person to this country and say, we want to ask you questions? Is that fair game?
I don't think it's bad to invite them in to answer questions, okay? What troubles me is the circus environment associated with this. I mean, it was really over the top, and it really does have the flavor of, piling on. But, I mean, there's a lot of blame on both sides here.
Greg wrote an op-ed today with, I believe, the Democrat from Oregon, and Weiland, I believe his name is. He's in the front page, he's in the op-ed page today. Wants to drop our 5-level or 6-level tax, corporate tax rates, or our tax rates for individuals down to 3, and give corporations a tax rate cut, which would amount to about a 30% cut. Did you read his op-ed? Do you
No,
agree
I haven't
with that?
read the op-ed. Look, we've got so many problems, I mean, the tax structure is unquestionably one of them. But I think if we do what the Obama administration is doing, which is tackling 500 things at the same time, you're in danger of not getting anything done. Let's put out the fires that we've got and then come back in and try to, fix other things.
No Child Left Behind. Is it time to get rid of it? Is there time to... These are one of those things that everybody thought that was a problem that would be fixed pretty much right away by Obama and his administration. Saying that it's an unfunded mandate, number one. Number two, it turns school districts into, and in the case of Manchester, makes us appear as if our district is not doing a very good job because it includes our 76 different speaking citizens. In other words, we're a refugee center, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, Mayor Gatsis has asked that we be allowed to take out from the testing score final grading these immigrants that come here and are tested and their scores are included. Are we just so far ahead of ourselves on trying to get so much accomplished that we can't even take care of some of the stuff that we have in front of us right now, like No Child Left Behind? Is there something we should do about it?
Well, I think No Child Left Behind has caused huge problems in teacher assessment. In every school that I have ever talked to, any teacher I've talked to will tell you that, teacher assessment and student assessment is essentially broken here. And so I think we really need to go back and look at the whole, No Child Left Behind. It's a nice theoretical goal to get everybody up to 100%, but you're never going to get there. And then you start penalizing teachers and students for not getting there. I mean, you're creating havoc. But again, this shows the danger of having one monolithic body coming in there and imposing something on the whole country. Okay, let's education as an example for a broader system. A lot of these issues should be pushed down to the states. Let the states deal with these. They're much closer to the problem, and we could see what works and what doesn't work in a variety of different settings without disrupting the whole system.
Would you agree that with Obama offering the loan guarantees to the 2 nuclear power plants in Georgia, that officially, the gates are open to nuclear power industry in this country again? I mean, that was a major move, it seemed like to me.
It was a major move, and it highlights actually a very serious problem, and that is for those of us who believe that nuclear power is part of the broader solution in the medium and long term. Okay, the principal problem is that there's no financing for it. The banks will not do lending for those long-term kind of projects. You can't get the capital markets, the bond markets to provide that. One of the things that I've done is I've called for the creation of a national infrastructure bank, which Obama is supportive of. There have been about 7 bills in the House, 8 bills in the House. spanning both Democratic and Republican administrations, calling for a national infrastructure bank that will help our broad problem with infrastructure. But I think you need that, particularly in creating nuclear facilities in the future, because the private sector is not, in the short term, going to lend it. And I've actually called, I've written a paper basically saying this is what it would look like. These are the elements that would underlie good governance in a state-owned enterprise. But again, going back to the whole discussion about governments are not good at providing goods and services, I would like to see the creation of a national infrastructure bank incorporate a requirement that it be privatized in 10, 15 years.
All right, my friend, we're going to give you about a minute or two, whatever time you need to kind of wrap this up. Is there any question that we didn't ask you tonight that you'd like to cover? Is there something in specific that you'd say, hey, I would have liked to have talked about this subject?
Well, again, I would like to talk about the reason why I'm running, and I'm running not because I, need a career in politics. I've had a wonderful career in the private sector. I've served my country before, and when I retired in 2008, I thought that teaching at Stanford was going to be the capstone of a wonderful career. But then the financial crisis started, and then all of the problems started, and little by little, I came to the conclusion that my life's experience had brought me and given me the skills and the expertise that were really needed for the issues of the day. As I said earlier in the program, I think that there are 3 issues that are going to dominate the national agenda in the next 5 or 10 years. The economy, and again, that includes healthcare, energy, and national security. And I've spent my whole life in all of these issues. I've served in the U.S. government. I studied under Milton Friedman. I now teach at Stanford. I know these issues very, very well. In energy, I have spent 25 years of my career in all phases of the energy industry. I know that I can make a contribution in that area. And last but certainly not least is national security and foreign policy, particularly as it relates to Asia and the Middle East. And here again, my background is ideally suited for that because I've lived in the Middle East, I speak Arabic, I have traveled to and done business in virtually every country in the Middle East. But I've also had the opportunity to work in virtually every country in Asia. And on behalf of the United States, I've also negotiated with countries like China, Japan, Korea on issues that span trade, competitiveness, governance, on a whole variety of things. So I look around, I don't see anybody that has that kind of background and experience for the issues at hand. And I think knowledge of a job is particularly important. No one that I know of would ever hire a plumber or a carpenter or an electrician who would never work in those trades. And yet we do the same thing over and over again. We take people with no background, experience, or expertise in any of these issues, and we send them to Washington hoping that they're going to be statesmen. All evidence to the contrary. I believe my background has equipped me very, very well for those issues. But I think it's particularly important for Washington because what we end up doing time and time again is we send people down there with none of this experience. We send people with raw political ambition down there. And what happens is on day one, when they get there, they look around for how they're going to manage in that system. And they get their cues either from the special interests, from the lobbyists, or they get it from the party, right? And they take the party line, hook, line, and sinker. But either way, they end up immediately becoming Washington's representative to the state as opposed to the state's representative to Washington. I believe my background and experience has given me the background and the backbone to be your representative to Washington. And I hope with your support that I will make it there.
Yeah, that is very well put. There's a guy on chat line who's asked this question 3 times, so let me just drag it in here at the last moment. If you're elected, would you fight to get New Hampshire as full 40% of federal funding for special needs kids as opposed to the 18% that we currently get?
Honestly, I haven't spent a lot of time with that issue. I would look at it very seriously. You know my commitment to education and to kids, so it would be something I would take a very close look at.
How do they get a hold of you, Bob, if they wanted to meet you?
The best way to do it is to look at my website, which is very easy to find. It's simply my name, bobbestani.com, and you can go to my website there. And you can also send me an email at rbestani@aol.com. or give me a call at 965-5708. I'd be happy to talk to you.
Fantastic.
We started at 8.